So first of all, why are we all here? Well, the aim of this webinar is that we wanted to talk to you a little bit about global supply chains and really how to build a robust global supply chain. That's become obviously particularly important over the last 6 months or so as we've been living through the epoch of coronavirus. And what we have discovered is that we've actually had an opportunity to test what we think is a first-rate global supply chain that we've actually built. And we want to share a little bit about what we've done in the past. We want to share a little bit about our experiences in the coronavirus pandemic, and also talk a little bit about business continuity, because while it's important that you have a robust supply chain in place, and there are benefits and drawbacks to international supply chains, actually what underpins it is a robust business continuity plan and a solution that can be rolled out rapidly and can address some of the weaknesses that can perhaps be exposed by macro events. So we're going to use that and focus on that today. Yeah? But before we start, I am aware that a few of you may not know who ADVA are, so I wanted to just spend a couple of minutes just outlining a little bit about ADVA. We are actually a German company, so we're headquartered in Munich. We have around about 1,900 employees, and we're kind of what we would call a mid-sized business. We're around about €500 million in revenue. What do? We do software and hardware for open networking, and that includes optical networks, dense wavelength division multiplexing, and Ethernet. Now, Ethernet, you may or may not be aware, underpins a lot of the way we work today in terms of our broadband infrastructure. And actually, if you look at ADVA's technology and some of our customers, and we do a lot of business with British Telecom and with OpenReach, I would probably go so far as to say, if you're listening to this webinar from within the UK today, there is a 100% likelihood that your traffic from your home is traversing ADVA equipment right now. So we provide a lot of the backhaul infrastructure, the kind of hidden piece of the broadband network for most of the communications providers in the UK today, and that's through our wholesale relationship with OpenReach. But what we actually are trying to do is we're trying to keep up with the very fast pace of bandwidth demand that's going on in the world. More people are consuming content over the internet. I think the days of receiving your television content through satellite dishes are probably in decline now, and we're going to see more and more going over the top. And that means that all those pipes that go into your home and actually go from the street cabinets back into the cloud itself need to be growing as rapidly as the quality of the content is growing. And today we're all used to terms like high definition 1080p TV, which is quite bandwidth intensive. If you look at your bandwidth in your home network, you'll see that it does stress it a little bit when all your kids are watching their content at the same time. But imagine if you're taking that from high definition to what's called 4K TV, or even Ultra, which is 8K TV. And all of those require more bandwidth, and they require more processing power as well. And that actually puts more and more of a strain on the network. So it's definitely an interesting space to work in right now, and it's a rapidly developing space. And ADVA are sitting behind it all, and are probably a very well hidden secret in that respect. You see from this slide that I've highlighted that we have three major hubs around the world. We have one hub in America, actually in Atlanta, one hub in the Far East based out of Shenzhen near Hong Kong, and our third and European hub is based out of a place called Meiningen in the former East Germany. Now, those are our principal regional HQs, but they're supported by a number of different sites around the world, which are either operational sites or significant clusters of research and development. And you see right in the top in the middle, our UK-based facility, which is in the lovely York in the Kingdom of Yorkshire. I'm not sure I'm allowed to call it Kingdom of Yorkshire, but that's how it feels sometimes. And that's where I'm speaking to you from today. Now, York is particularly important in our supply chain because it is also one of our distribution hubs, and Vicky will talk about that in a little while as well. Sort of slightly more boring piece. What do we do? Well, we do stuff, we do hardware, but we also do software. However, a lot of the focus about what we're going to talk about today is the hardware aspect of our business. And the reason for that is clearly that puts the most demand on supply chains. The difference between hardware and software is that if you're delivering hardware, physically you have to make it, physically you have to ship it, and you have to get the demand right. It's not like a piece of software where if somebody wants to download it, they simply link to a server and pull it down. Hardware, you have to have that product available in the right geography at the right time and built to the correct specification for the customer. And you see here we have quite a large variety of different types of hardware, and that spans from what we call cloud interconnect, and those are the types of products that are consumed by the very large cloud providers, the Googles, the Amazons, the Microsofts, people like that, to underpin technologies such as Azure or Amazon EC2 or something like that. Through cloud access is the backhaul and access equipment that businesses and indeed wholesalers like Openreach use to deliver their Ethernet services and to backhaul their broadband infrastructure and their fiber to the premises. And then on the right hand side, you see we also have a section for network synchronization. And network synchronization is all about delivering robust frequency, phase, and time across the network, because I'm sure at least one of you on the call today is aware time is becoming more and more important to delivery of robust network infrastructure. But that is a webinar for another day. And you see broadly the mix of different revenues that we achieve in those different areas. So hardware, the focus today. Software has its own issues in terms of supply chain, principally around licensing and the different licensing models in different countries, but we will focus on delivering hardware today. Some of our customers, I won't read this full list, other than to just say, I'll just call out the left-hand side under the service providers. BT and Openreach are major customers for us in the UK, but we also service other customers in and around Europe. And we have relationships with 17 of the top 25 service providers globally. And you see broadly where our mix of different customers actually sit. So we go across internet and cloud, private enterprises, and government and education. But the vast majority of our service providers, of our customer base, is service providers. Now, what I will say about that slide is that these customers are distributed all over the world. And what that means is that we need to have a supply chain and a distribution network that actually is available all over the world. Oh, my apologies, I just moved on a little bit fast. And that is where my colleague Vicky Camish comes in. Vicky is Director of Operations for ADVA UK, is actually responsible for making sure that we have the right product in the right place at the right time. And she's going to talk to you a little bit more about the way that our supply chain is set up. So I will hand over to Vicky at this point, and hopefully she's able to take control of the presentation, and I will speak to you a little bit later on.
Thank you very much, Rob. So good morning, everybody. As Rob said, it's great to have been given the opportunity to talk to you all today. I hope you enjoy the presentation and also, as importantly, find it useful. So what we're going to look at today, as you can see on the slide, the agenda, we've got 4 points. First of all, we're going to look at ADVA's global supply chain model and what that looks like. We're then going to look at the general positives and negatives of a global supply chain, and that's not just akin to ADVA, but across every business. We'll then look at how this is closely tied into business continuity. We'll look at how we can mitigate any risks of a global supply chain. And then finally, what we'll do is we'll hand over to Rob again, and both Rob and I will co-present on the final slide, which sort of really details how ADVA has lived and breathed the COVID-19 situation. Okay, so the first slide, as mentioned, is looking at the global supply chain that ADVA has. Firstly, what we'll do is we'll focus on the manufacturing side of this. So basically, as you can see from the slide, we outsource 100% of our board level assembly and 90% of the final assembly and test. And we have three main EMS partners for this. We have Flextronic, Sanmina and Jabil. Jabil and Sanmina are predominantly China-based, and Flex has presence in Israel and Romania, in Timisoara. That said, they do have other sites. So Sanmina has a site in Thailand and Jabil in Hungary. As well as this, we additionally have in-house capability in our Meiningen and Atlanta plants. Rob's already mentioned that, which can be used as overflow. So when we look at, for instance, Flex and Sanmina, Flex are generally used for the optical line cards, passives, quite most of the complex products that we deal with, and Ethernet encryption. Sanmina tend to be a high volume Ethernet sync and time infrastructure such as fans and shelves, etc. And generally what we do is we'll purchase our optics generally from China and Southeast Asia from companies such as Acacia, Eoptolink and Acerlink. So that's basically the manufacturing side of things. What we then do is we have the kit shipped with quite an extensive portfolio of freight forwarders and couriers, either into our buffer stocks within our Shenzhen office, or direct to our local distribution sites in Meiningen, Atlanta and York. Within those local sites, we also have something called a CFT, which stands for Customer Focus Team. And that's basically a team of people that are there almost to act as a sort of a go-between between yourselves and operations. So if you have any queries about your orders, about lead times, about delivery dates, etc., you can go directly to the CFT people. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll also, within the York site and Meiningen site, is we'll also carry out in-house staging such as loading defaults, configuration of routers and full staging of optical systems. And what we'll do also on the future slides, we'll look at the business continuity that we have for those sites. And as you can see on the bottom left hand side of the slide, number of products manufactured is around 900 and specific sales items up to 7,000. The reason why that's different is because you can have one particular chassis, but you can maybe have different software versions on it, different, as I've mentioned earlier on, different configuration settings, staging settings. Customer order lead time generally 10 to 30 calendar days. Again, that can fluctuate vastly on determined whether it's actually forecast and what particular product range it is. Ethernet tends to be a lot quicker in terms of the lead time as opposed to the more complex optical products. Supply chain upside flexibility. What we like to aim for is a 50% within 4 weeks, so that's a pretty good thing. And generally our inventory turns are around between 5 and 7. Okay, so that's that. So generally, what are the positives and negatives of a global supply chain? So first and foremost, the positives: greater sourcing opportunities, and it's that old adage, the wider you cast your net, the more chance of catching the fish. And that also goes the same for the second point as well, in terms of access to expertise and innovation. If we're looking at the globe, we are going to come across more people with that expertise, innovation, different viewpoints, and different ways of looking at things, new ideas, that creativity that we want to tap into. Obviously more room to grow as well, and also a key one is the ability to offer competitively priced products. Again, the wider you cast your net, the more competition's out there, and therefore the more competitively priced products and components that you're going to get. As I've already mentioned, vendor managed inventory, it allows us to actually not only hold inventory within our own sites, but also within our suppliers' sites as well. So, if we do get any upside or if there are any issues, we can tap into that at any time that we need to. And that really sort of plays again into the final positive, the reacting rapidly to flexing demands. It's absolutely key that we have those, those little pockets of contingency that we can delve into when we need to. On the flip side of it is the negatives, greater exposure to global events, trade wars. We've very much been sort of interested in the developments with the Trump tariffs, for instance, between China and the US. Also, we have the coronavirus, which we're all painfully aware of. We're living and breathing this horrible virus in terms of, what the impact that this is actually having on us on a day-to-day basis. And this is not just about supply chain, but life in general. Okay, and also the volcanic eruptions. I don't know if you remember, some years back we had the volcanic eruption in Iceland. Now, Rob challenged me to try and pronounce the name of the volcano, and I'm going to take it up. It's Eyjafjallajökull. So there we go, Rob. I've done it. So yeah, the volcanic eruption obviously created an awful lot of problems in terms of air freight and air travel generally. Competition. So what happens if a competitor buys one of our manufacturers or our suppliers? I mean, at worst case, they could automatically cease or halt the supply of components or services to us, which would be, absolutely devastating. And also, even if they decided not to do that, they could at least put a massive hike in price for us, which, again, it can be just as damaging. Also added complexity, just the fact that you're working in a different time zone, and that adds delays in terms of if you've got a query, if you're wanting to know when something is going to arrive, we maybe have to wait a day before we can give you that answer, because the question's been asked just at the point that we're opening, but unfortunately the supply is closing. Language and culture as well, dealing with different languages and cultures, although people can speak English very well generally, just getting across your point and the importance of your point sometimes can be quite complex. It can be quite difficult. So that is a challenge. And then looking at compliance as well, you've got national and local regulations that you need to adhere to, such as wasting, ROS. There's lots of industry standards, trade agreements that we have to adhere to, corporate policy, CSR, corporate social responsibility, contractual obligations, and customer expectations as well. And all of these, when you're dealing with a third party, it can be challenging to make sure that they're adhering to every single standard and agreement and policy that you've got in place. So yeah, those are generally the positive and negatives. There are more, but we just wanted to really just focus on the main ones. Every supply chain, whether it be global or not, has its positives and negatives, and the key to this is again about contingency and what plans we've got in place to mitigate that risk. And that neatly leads me into the next section of my presentation. So general business continuity in ADVA. So I've got some sort of cheesy common quotes in here. I thought I'll put these in. So business continuity. So planning is bringing the future into the present so that you can do something about it now. And that was by a guy called Alan Lakin, who's an author and specialised in time management. The second one is from a French guy called Henri Poincaré. It is far better to foresee even without certainty than not to foresee at all. And Henri was a French mathematician, physicist, engineer and philosopher. And then finally we've got, if anything is certain, it is that change is certain. The world we are planning for today will not exist in this form tomorrow. And that's quite poignant when you think about where we are currently today in the world of coronavirus and what the world will look like tomorrow. We were talking earlier on about the ever evolving, changing scenarios with do we wear masks, don't we wear masks, etc. And that's from a guy called Philip Crosby, a general businessman, author, specifically in focusing on management and quality management. Okay, so just 3 quotes there about business continuity. So what we'll do in the next few slides is we'll talk about our business continuity and looking at some of the risks that I've just mentioned and what we've done to mitigate those risks. So when you're dealing with any external supplier, the absolute key point is having a good contract in place. And as we can see here, with all our major key suppliers, we have 4 key points. Lead time targets. We must have lead time targets with our suppliers. We must be clear with our suppliers right from the word go what our expectations are and set those out. And to ensure that they are met, we've got penalty terms if the lead times are not being met. Okay. The third part of this is the capacity share guaranteed by contract. So this mitigates the risk of, potentially our supplier, whether it be a hardware or a services supplier, being bought out by a competitor, or indeed if we just have a massive ramp up or in requirements, so we have to have that guarantee of capacity. And the fourth one is a really key point, and quite often it's easy to forget. A lot of people say to us, ADVA, what are your business continuity plans? What have you got in place? The flip side, we've got to be absolutely certain that actually our suppliers that we deal with also have business continuity controls and plans in place. And that's an absolute key point. It can't all be down to ADVA. We've got to have that reassurance that our suppliers can also react accordingly. All of those 4 points are also, they're underpinned by a forecast that are provided by ADVA into our 3 EMS partners. And that's based on orders, forecast projects and statistical forecasts on high running projects. And that helps us with our buffer calculations. But as you'll probably appreciate, our forecast into our customer, into our supplier, should I say, sorry, is only as good as the forecast that we get from the customers. And that's something quite key and quite to mention. Okay, so moving on to scalability and flexibility. So the scalability and flexibility is focusing on our local sites. So as Rob's mentioned, we have York, Meiningen, Atlanta and Shenzhen. Okay, so yeah, on the York site, if we need to scale or we need to flex, we can share between sites in terms of resources, and we're able to do that because we're all on a common ERP system in terms of SAP. So every single site shares that same system. We also have global processes. Yes, we might have some local nuances to those, but generally the framework is exactly the same. So we're able to pick up from site to site how we do things. So that enables us to share resource between York and Meiningen. Obviously with COVID, it's difficult. We can't be flying people, from each of the different sites. So that's a bit of a limitation with COVID. But within site, we have cross-trained people between departments, and that's not just in ops as well. We actually can call upon, our customer services department and to a certain extent our CFT department as well. We have people that are cross-trained. Also, we can work different shift patterns, and that's exactly what we're doing now because of COVID-19. The challenges of childcare, as I think you'll all appreciate, it's very, very difficult. And obviously my team have a physicality to them, so they have to come into the office, they have to do the physical work. So, sharing childcare is a challenge. So we're allowing shift work to be able to do that. And also we can bring in external labour as well. So Meiningen is exactly the same as York in terms of the capabilities and flexibilities, apart from we're also manufacturing within Meiningen, as mentioned before. Atlanta is exactly the same as Meiningen and York. You can see a bit of a pattern here. However, in Atlanta, they also outsource to a 3PL, a third-party logistics house in the form of expediters, and they help with logistics and staging. And Shenzhen are very much the same, but they use a company called Modus Link. Okay, and that's, as I say, all underpins the support that we get from our 3 EMS partners. All right, the next slide, this one is very, very simple, and I like it to be simple. When it comes to business continuity and the temporary cease in supply, this is absolutely catastrophic for us. So we need something in place that's robust and helps us through. And the very simple answer to that is buffer stocks. So as I've already mentioned, we have buffer stocks at our suppliers, but we also have buffer stocks across all sites. So for York specifically, we have 4 to 5 weeks worth actually sitting on the shelf of inventory, but then we have that backed up by 6 weeks of stock on the sea lane and 1 week of stock on the air. So generally you're looking at around 6 weeks in total total to 10 weeks in total. How we calculate the buffer stocks is based on looking at lead times and also just, you know, history, what's the demand been, but more importantly, what's the forecast. And as I mentioned earlier, this is why it's really important we get good forecasts from our customers. And of course, if we want to increase the buffer or decrease the buffer for whatever reason, we can manipulate the lead time calculations within our ERP systems to be able to do that. And we learned this, and we were quite successful about doing this when we introduced some additional buffer stocks to support with Brexit, when we thought Brexit was going to happen a bit back with the original dates. But we were able to increase our buffers to support that. And of course, also, you know, we have alternative suppliers. You know, we have second and third source coverage and strategic supplier engagement, so we can turn those suppliers up when we need to. And components can be sourced pretty much from anywhere in the globe at any time, if we're talking about components specifically. So that's very briefly, in a nutshell. You know, I could probably talk for hours about this. It's a topic that's very close to my heart and I'm very passionate about. So I hope that's helped to just give a very, very brief overview about, you know, ADVA and our supply chain. But of course, more than happy to, if people want to talk about it further, happy to do so. So this takes us to the final slide that Rob and I are going to present. So I'll hand back over to Rob. Rob's going to look at the left-hand side, talk to the left-hand side of the slide, and then I will talk to the right-hand side of the slide.
Thanks, Vicky. Yeah, Vicky and I generally have a lot of conversations about forecasts, me being on the sales side of things and her being on the operations side of things. And it really is important that we do get that right, because it does underpin our ability to deliver a good customer experience as well. But moving on to this last slide, as Vicky said, obviously coronavirus has had a big effect on the globe, actually, not just the telecommunications industry, to all industries. And really, this started to emerge in kind of January of this year. So almost immediately, the effects were felt in Wuhan in China. And they very quickly spread around the rest of the Chinese mainland before it started to gain momentum through the rest of the world through February, March, and then obviously into April, May, June as well. The initial effects we were feeling were two primary effects on the equipment vendor community. The first one was the international supply chain distribution, and then the second one was an operational and logistics disruption on a more domestic basis, and I'm looking specifically at the UK here. So that rapidly evolving supply chain shock started initially in China and Southeast Asia, and that was kind of happening through end of January, February through April. But then during March through May, that supply chain shock actually moved to the European supply chains. And in fact, when you look at what was happening in Asia in March through May, there was a gradual reopening of contract manufacturers in the Far East, and an easing of some of the restrictions that they were facing. So, as Vicky mentioned before, our judicious use of buffer stocks meant that we were well set to absorb that initial supply chain disruption. However, when you start to use buffer stocks, obviously you start to deplete those, and you need to think about how they're replenished. Sea lanes take a long time. It's a 6-week slow boat from China, but air freight is around about 5 days. So you can fall back on air freight. The problem is that it's not as sustainable. It's got more carbon footprint impact. And the other problem that we experienced is because passenger travel was severely curtailed during the first part of this year, actually passenger aircraft carry a lot of international freight. And that meant that there was a huge restriction on the air freight lanes that were available. And of course, where you get a restriction in a market on the supply, then costs increase accordingly for that particular market. So we did see quite a significant increase in costs associated with international freight, principally air freight. Then moving on through the UK operational impact, obviously, I think it was March the 23rd, we went into lockdown in the UK. And at that point, you restrict key personnel's activity, their movement around the different locations that they work in. And that meant that we had to revise logistics process because we have to maintain health and safety. We also have a lot of delays to ongoing projects, and that affects the demand profile that goes through with the various different items that have been forecast. So this supply chain shock, initially the ripples were felt through the Asian supply chain, but then it very rapidly moved out through Europe and into UK. And at this point, what I'll do is I'll hand over to Vicky to talk a little bit about the mitigation.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah, so one thing I've already talked a bit about is the buffer stocks. You know, that was absolutely key in keeping the supply going. I mean, luckily as well, it was quite fortuitous, because what we'd done is we'd actually built additional buffer anyway for the Chinese New Year. I don't know if for those of you know, but you know, come the end of January, the Chinese New Year, unfortunately, we only get one day. They tend to take about 2 weeks to celebrate. So we'd already increased buffer stocks somewhat to mitigate that. So we were quite lucky that we had those buffer stocks in place. And as I already mentioned as well, you know, when you look at the sea lane buffer stocks, we have 10 weeks on shelf on the sea lane anyway. So that really helped us ride the storm, really, as it were. Increased use of air freight, as Rob has already mentioned. You know, if we'd gone for weeks and weeks without any supply, and then obviously we wouldn't just, as soon as we get that supply, just put that onto the sea lane as normal. What we would do is we'd automatically put that onto the air lane to be able to get that in quicker and recover the lost buffers that we'd used during the weeks of shutdown. I think the key point for us as well was just with regards to the site, the UK site here in York. You know, as we mentioned earlier on, we have staging and logistics, and one of the things was absolutely critical. You know, we talk about hardware, we talk about product, but what's really critical is the people, and keeping the people safe so that the people can actually keep the supply chain going. You know, you can have all the product in the world, but if there's nobody there to actually book it in, to ship it, to stage it, then there's no point having the product in the first place. So what we did was very, very early on, actually before government guidelines, we basically sent all the non-operational staff home to work from home. And that's actually worked really, really well. And I know I've had lots of conversations over the last few months with people, you know, both in ADVA and outside of ADVA with different companies about how well home working actually has worked for some people. Not for everybody, but for a lot of people it has. So that has worked really, really well. But also within the operational department, what we did was we actually separated out some key ops colleagues so that they're absolutely also isolated from operations staff. So as it says here, you know, we've got like a red team and a blue team. So basically what would happen, God forbid, should, you know, the virus get into the building, we could then send everybody home to self-isolate until they either tested or for the full 14 days. And then what we would do is we'd bring the blue team back onto site, and we would be able to get the critical orders out of the door. So that was something that was really important to us. Also, what we did really, really early on, and again, I was joking about this early on, is that, you know, we increased the amount of PPE. We were very early in this. We started installing the hospital style wall hand sanitizers at the end of January, beginning of February, and everybody was like, "Why on earth are you doing this? Isn't this overkill? Isn't this a bit too much?" Likewise, we also ordered masks, face masks, and gloves for the operational team, because they were handling products coming in from China and Malaysia, and we didn't know the impact of, you know, how long does the virus live on surfaces. So, you know, to safeguard the team and their health, we implemented that. And again, at the time, it was quite funny because my team were like, why do we have to wear masks? Why do we have to have gloves? But now it's a case of, can we have more gloves? Can we have more masks? We need hand sanitizers. So I think we reacted very, very quickly and with a lot of foresight, which I'm really, really pleased about. Also, as well, you know, we look at the if somebody does need to come to site to go into the labs, we have a very stringent plan. We have very stringent rules and regulations that everybody has to adhere to and has to sign up to. And the final point here, we have regular health and safety briefings, and these go out to the whole site. There's reminders about the rules and what people should be observing and how they should be behaving. And as it says here, we Openreach led industry and safety initiatives have given us that additional and valued information and insight. So we've really taken, some of the guidance and lead from Openreach on that as well. Yeah, so I think all in all, we've so far, touch wood, we've managed to ride the storm really, really well. As a team, I'm very, very proud of them. They've done a fantastic job in some very, very challenging circumstances.
Thanks, Vicky. And I think I would just add one final tagline at the end. If you want to sum up the whole of supply chain and business continuity, you really can capture it in the 7 Ps. So proper preparation prevents piss poor performance.
Yes,
thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you.
We're happy to take questions as you wish.